Hello, everyone, and welcome to All Things Watched, where we talk all things movies, television, streaming, and everything in between. And in this episode, or in this video, we are going to talk about episode 2 of The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live. And this episode was titled Gone, because the first 3 episodes are titled Years Gone By, which is a direct reference to an episode back in the original series, but this one being episode 2 is titled Gone. And it was an awesome episode, a little bit predictable in the sense that we figured episode 2 will be told by, from Michonne's perspective. So in that sense, it was a little bit predictable, but still an excellent episode all the same. So let's just go right ahead and jump into it. If you're not a subscriber and you want to support the channel for absolutely free, click that subscribe button and all that good stuff. And if not, then welcome anyways, even if you're not a subscriber. So let's go ahead and jump in. This episode begins at 6 years later after the bridge, and then the scene opens with a really cool close-up shot of Michonne, which is really cool because Danny Guerrera just is such a phenomenal actor that you can see how good her acting performance is just by her facial expressions. And she's being interviewed here, and it's very important to remember that because this sort of parallels a scene that we'll get at the very end, or at least towards the end of the episode, when she once again is being interviewed by the CRM. But here she is being interviewed, and she's being interviewed here by this character who's known as Aiden. And Aiden is the leader of another group or colony, whatever you would like to call, which is the group that she basically met up with when she left our group back in the original series of The Walking Dead when she went out to look for Rick. And of course, in the original series, the last time we see her, she's actually with these two characters who are now once again reprising their roles as Bailey and Elle, or Ella, or Elle, I believe it was, yeah. So Bailey and Elle, and these two are madly in love, and you actually learn as the episode goes on that Elle is actually pregnant. And so if you can remember, they did make a brief appearance in the original Walking Dead series because Michonne, I believe it was Michonne, actually saved them from some form of attack. I can't remember if it was like a zombie attack or a human attack, but I think it was, I think she saved them from zombies. But either way, it was great to see them back here reprising their roles. They're really likable, really cool characters. And so basically the idea is that Michonne is being interviewed because she wants to leave this colony and she's asking for resources. And so while she's in the middle of the interview, these two, Elle and Bailey, are sort of trying to stick up for Michonne and being and sort of trying to help her case towards Aiden, telling Aiden that Michonne helped them save their life and that she's been a great asset, so why not just let her go and give her the horse. And then this character pops in, who was probably my favorite character, if not the standard of the entire episode. And this character's name was Nat, and he was portrayed by Matthew Jeffers. And man, I wish we had have got to see a lot more of him in this episode. In fact, I wish that he ends up getting killed off in this episode. In fact, all these people that were with Michonne ends up getting killed off. But I really wish that Nat had stuck around. He was a really cool, compelling character. He was also a really powerful character. He was a great asset to the team, and I think he would have been so cool to see him, join forces with Rick and Michonne, to see if once Rick and Michonne gets to the point where they do try to escape the CRM. I mean, that's pretty, inevitable. I think. I don't think, and I don't think it's too hard to see that something's going to have to give in this episode eventually, whether it's not they try to overtake the CRM or escape the CRM. Either way, I would have loved to see this character be a part of it, but unfortunately they do kill him off in this episode. So then we get this really cool shot, and I just wanted to sort of put this screenshot in here real quick just to sort of give you an idea of what this colony or what this community is really all about. They basically do not stop moving. Now, they do move at a really slow pace, but the important thing to keep in mind is that the colony or the community does not stop moving. And a part of me wonders if this colony could eventually end up sort of aiding Michonne and Rick, maybe like keeping them or holding them, sort of, protecting them as the series goes by. I don't think that this is the last that we've seen this colony, because we did see them in the original series as well. So I do believe that it's that, or at least potentially, that we could see a lot more of this colony, and I do think that that they could play a bigger role in the future. But I don't really know. I mean, maybe they won't. Maybe the only purpose of them was to sort of transition Michonne onto this journey of finding Rick. But who knows? Either way, it was really cool to see them. They actually put me in mind of a community that's in the Twisted Metal season 1 as well, which I think they called in Twisted Metal, I think they were called the Convoy or something like that. And so they just sort of they just don't stop moving, which is really how they stay alive, basically how they stay alive. But Michonne has a couple good points to Aiden as well. She's like, hey, you don't stop for anyone, not even your own people or your own family, whatnot. So there do be a little bit of dispute, but either way, Michonne ends up leaving, and Nat ends up helping her along with Bailey and Elle, and that basically becomes Michonne's people all throughout this entire episode, leading up to her eventually stumbling upon Rick and seeing why she ends up attacking the CRM helicopter. I also really like the perspective of this episode, how they sort of pinned Rick and Michonne against each other, because Rick has been forced after all these years to sort of be a part of the CRM, but here Michonne gets a very nasty, a very evil, perspective of the CRM, because she sees and witnesses the CRM killing all these innocent people, which are also her friends, and actually people that help bring her to Rick, which I do also think will become very important as we continue on with the series. But anyways, we get a really cool callback scene here, which I wanted to throw in, of Michonne using the walkie-talkie, and this is a great callback to the original series, because we know that she constantly speaks on the walkie-talkie trying to reach Judith. This was something that her and Judith sort of did in order to keep communications. I do believe at one point in this episode, Nat sort of tells her that they're no longer in signal or something like that, or they're no longer close enough for her to be able to contact Judith and the people that she's trying to talk to, and all the familiar friends and faces that we've come to love in the original series. But I did think this was a great callback, to that. The radio was really a great callback to many different characters, because remember, Rick and Morgan used to do it as well in the original series. Didn't end up becoming Judith and Michonne, and of course she would talk to RJ as well. So I really like how they're keeping these little tidbits, these little Easter eggs in this spin-off series, which really connects it back to the original series, which is actually probably, I would say that this spin-off, The Ones Who Live, connects to the original even more than any of them, really, even more than Dead City or Daryl Dixon. Well, I shouldn't say that, because the ending of Daryl Dixon was pretty heavily involved. The original, because of Carol returning. Season 2 of Daryl Dixon is going to be called The Book of Carol, so that'll be interesting to see as well. But either way, I really like this little tidbit here of Michonne using the walkie-talkie to actually, try to reach Judith and the other survivors. So then finally, after all this, Michonne finally ends up getting her horse, and as you can see, Nat is on a horse as well. And he seems to be, a really small dude. He suffers from dwarfism and whatnot, so he's kind of like a midget type thing, but or he suffers from dwarfism. I'm not really sure what the politically correct thing to say is, but you get what I'm saying. He's just this really small dude, but I absolutely love him. He's actually probably one of my favorite characters in this episode, and I would have loved to see him and his story. I do think that they should have kept Nat around. He's such a compelling character, and he was such a great ally to Michonne, but at the same time, the way that he dies also, it was a great way to set up the sort of the feud, or not really so much a feud, but the internal struggles that Rick and Michonne will have at the CRM, because she, grows to love Nat, and she actually helps Nat and nurtures Nat back to health during the second half of this episode. But either way, he gives her the horse and basically tells her what direction to go and whatnot, and warns her about this massive migration of a zombie herd type thing, which we'll see here once she actually does take off and we see her on the horse. And this is the massive migration herd that Nat and Bailey and Elle and even Aiden, I believe, warned Michonne about. I believe we actually seen this in the trailer as well, very early on. This was part of the early promotional promotional stuff, the videos, the trailers, and all that stuff, seeing Michonne with her sword just going towards this massive, thing of walkers. Now, from the promotional standpoint, when we seen this with the trailers and whatnot, I kind of thought that maybe this was just, Michonne, or this was maybe like a form of defense or something that the CRM would use, just this big herd of walkers. But it turns out was just an obstacle that she had to use to get through it. And so she goes towards the herd, and we get this really cool scene here. Once again, really cinematic, really good special effects. She shoots this gun or whatnot, which makes sort of like this whistling noise, and it blows up this whole section of the herd. And I think that this was also the same weapon. Well, actually, it was. It's the same type of weapon that she ends up using eventually, her and Nat, to take down the CRM helicopter, which has Rick in it. But I think it makes a lot of noise for the sake of attracting walkers, so it blows up, killing a lot of walkers. But then it also makes a lot of noise to sort of distract the walkers, and so she tries to break through, but she's not really able to. So her friends ends up coming back. Bale, L, what's his name? Bailey, sorry, L, and Nat, they end up coming back, and they end up, of course, actually helping her. And so between them all, they ends up shooting off, I can't remember what the actual name was, but some form of distractions and some form of explosions, which ends up making the herd kind of split in two, which I thought was very reminiscent sort of to the Red Sea splitting. I almost had like this Moses type feel to it, of almost like the Red Sea splitting, and so they're able to cross through the herd and whatnot, and which they actually do. And then we get a really cool scene here at night when they all decide to sort of stop and make camp because it is dark, and plus they want to rest. I would imagine they end up making a lot of headway here, and well, we know they must have, because we know that they are getting closer to excuse me, they are getting closer to Rick. She is trying to get to a place, I believe it was called Bridger's Terminal or something like that, because she believes that if she can make it there, then maybe somewhere around that area or somewhere around that location, she might actually be able to find Rick, which essentially she does eventually. But until they get to this point, we get this really cool scene here where they're all camping. This is also where Elle tells Michonne that she's pregnant. This is where we learn that. So once, of course, Elle ends up dying or being killed, it becomes even that much more devastating because she is pregnant. Of course, Michonne is a mother herself. She gave birth to RJ, which Rick does not even know about yet. So she can, I think that that maternity instinct, so to speak, kicks in and makes her feel for Elle even more, knowing the struggle, is hard enough to survive in this world, but then to have to carry a child and then get that child to survive, it can be very difficult if you're malnutrition and all, if you have malnutrition and all that kind of stuff. So she really connects with all these characters, and me too, personally. I really liked Elle, Bailey, and Nat, but I would have loved to see Nat survive a little longer. But they have a really cool scene here, lots of great backstory, really cool bonding moment between all the characters. And I just really loved their story. And so then they wake up the next day and they're going through the city. And once again, it's really cool set design, really cool. It feels like there's a lot of money put into this. It don't feel cheap. It didn't really feel like a green screen. It feels like they're actually on location and whatnot. So you could tell a lot of money went into the show, or at least it felt like it did. It felt like a very high budget show. And so once again, absolutely love Nat. And of course, there's other people here besides Nat, Bailey, and Elle as well, but these were, the primary focus of the episode. These were the ones that Michonne really connected to, that, helped Michonne end up, to end up finding her way back to Rick. And while they're going through this city, they end up seeing a helicopter come by, and we know that this is a CRM helicopter. We see the symbols, but we also know that this is not the same helicopter necessarily that Rick is in. Now, maybe he was in here, but we learn later on that we know later on that he wasn't here because he kind of plays like the devil's advocate. It's almost like he kind of knows what the CRM does, but he's kind of ignorant to it, or maybe he actually doesn't know. But I do think that to some degree he did know, because of the fact that, him and Okafor and Thorne from the previous episode were talking about maybe overthrowing the CRM, but they would have to do it politically and not by force, because they just wouldn't be strong enough to be able to overcome the army. So they would have to do it from the political side and just, remove certain people of power, so to speak. And so I don't know necessarily that Rick knew at this point what the CRM was doing, but I don't think he's an idiot either. So, but either way, he didn't know that the CRM were going to attack this group, and so the helicopter comes back and ends up releasing a bunch of gas, and the gas really does a ton of damage to Michonne, Nat, Elle, and to all of these characters really. And actually, the only ones that actually survived the gas is actually Michonne and Nat. And even then, it takes a lot of time, and a lot of nurturing, and they actually have to rely on oxygen and all that kind of stuff in order to get their lungs back, because this gas actually burned out their lungs and basically caused them to almost suffocate, but not quite. Like I said, Nat and Michonne was able to survive. But as you can see here, Elle, she ends up, succumbing to the gas, and this was really hard to watch and really impactful, given the fact that we know that she's pregnant. So it was not only Elle that was killed here, but also Elle's child. We also then see Bailey, and this was a really kind of creepy scene as well. We see Bailey here; he's turned now into the zombie because he's died. You can also see all the bodies all around here; they're all dead as well. And behind Bailey, Nat is actually hid away in there because he's really weak and he's slowly dying as well. But as you can see, everything is on fire, and I'm sort of under the impression that maybe Nat lit the fire for the sake of trying to defend himself, but I'm not really 100% sure. We don't actually see the fire start, so I'm just kind of coming up with that prediction on my own, so to speak. But either way, Michonne finally ends up overpowering him, but she does struggle because she's weak too. She doesn't have full strength. Her lungs are burnt out as well, but she is able to overcome the zombie Bailey as a zombie, and she's able to save herself and then also Nat as well. And so then this is when we sort of get this really cool montage, which I really appreciated, especially with the editing. If there's whether you love this show or hate it, you can't deny that The Ones Who Live has phenomenal editing and transitions between the scenes. I really loved how they did Rick's story in episode 1, and I really liked how they did Michonne's story in episode 2. And so it would be very interesting to see how they, sort of tell the story in episode 3, which we know after this one, or at least it should be, with Michonne and Rick now officially united at the end of this episode. So I don't suspect we'll get a whole lot of flashbacks. We might get a little bit, at least from Rick's perspective, but I don't suspect we're going to get a whole lot. But I do think that we might get a little bit. I would actually like to see a lot of Jadis and her backstory, but we'll have to wait and see where that goes. But I'm a big fan of Jadis. I like how cool she is. I like how she has that sort of relationship with Rick where she respects him, but not really, she cares about him and respects him enough to keep him alive, but not enough to let him go, if that makes sense. But anyways, as you can see, Michonne here has the oxygen. Nat was using the oxygen as well. And then we also see Michonne here starting to do push-ups. She's trying to regain strength, to be able to become the warrior and the leader and just the unstoppable force that Michonne is. The Michonne that we've grown to love over all this time and whatnot. So really cool sequence, and this is also a great way for them to sort of flash forward in the time a little bit in a way that makes sense, because you could say, well, what was Michonne doing during all this time, in order for her time period and her timeline to sync up with Rick's. Well, this is a great way to sort of waste a few years. You can say that she got damaged and it took her a year, maybe even 2 years to fully recover and to regain her strength. But once they get strong enough, she ends up giving Nat a map leading him back to Alexandria. She tells Nat, that that he can go there. He'll be safe there. They'll let him in. They'll welcome him. She says, go to Alexandria and tell them that that you know me, Michonne, and that I sent you, and you'll be safe there and whatnot. But of course, Nat, being such a cool character, and also after bonding with Michonne, basically refuses that, and he's like, nah, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to leave you now. We've made it this far, and whatnot. And so they finally venture out again, and they make it to Bridger's terminal, which is obviously the location that they're trying to get to. But once they get there, they end up finding all these dead bodies, and of course this makes Michonne really nervous because there's a few of the zombies here. There's a few zombies here that that are all burnt up, and there's a whole bunch of piles and whatnot as well. So she's not really able to fully identify the bodies. So she doesn't really know who's who. She doesn't really know if Rick might be one of them and whatnot. So it's a really emotional time, and it seems like she spends like the entire day just looking through the dead bodies and whatnot, which ends up leading into and transitioning into a really cool scene here at night, which once again makes me absolutely fall in love with Nat, this new character Nat, because he comforts comforts her, but not in a weird way. He's not trying to take advantage of her vulnerability. He does it from a very friendly, in a legitimate, caring way, and he's trying to comfort her. And this is actually the first time that we really see Michonne truly break down ever since Rick left, and we see her now really starting to let go. Not in the sense that she's giving up on Rick, but more so in the sense that she's sort of just coming to terms that maybe he is alive, maybe he's not alive, but either way, she's probably not going to find him at this point. And it was a really emotional scene. It was really cool to see, and I'm really happy that Nat was in this scene, and we got to see him and her interact on that level, because I think that Nat really has a great heart, and I do think that he really meant well, and I don't think that he would ever hurt Michonne, and especially after everything that they've just been through. She helped him recuperate and whatnot, and so the next day, once it becomes daylight, they decide then that they're going to turn around and go back, and now Michonne and Nat are going to return to Alexandria. And this now is when finally the timeline ends up syncing up, because on their way back they end up seeing a helicopter coming towards them, and now this is the helicopter that Rick is in. Remember, in episode 1 we seen it from his perspective. Now we're going to see it from Michonne's perspective, and Nat pulls out this little tiny gun, and he has like this little tripod type thing that he sets the gun on, which I thought was really cool. And he actually shoots the weapon once, and when he shoots it, they think that they actually missed the helicopter, and he's like, oh crap, I missed, it must have been a dud and whatnot. But we know from looking back to episode 1 that he actually didn't miss, because that first shot ends up going through Okafor, which was Rick's friend. So he actually did hit the helicopter, and he actually killed Okafor. It's just it must not have blown up, or it did blow up, but it blew up inside of Okafor, which is why Okafor's body ended up blowing up in the first episode, but they don't know that. Nat just simply thinks that he missed, so he ends up shooting again, hitting the helicopter, and I think he actually hits the helicopter twice, causing the helicopter to crash. And so Nat ends up sort of keeping his distance, and he keeps shooting this little rocket gun towards all the people that comes out of the helicopter, all the CRM members. As you can see, the CRM members starts to open fire, and of course, once again, we know that the leader of this unit now is Rick, just because he's the highest authority that survived. And so Michonne ends up going in basically all stealthy with her sword, while Nat continues to shoot rockets, and this is when it starts to sync up to the first episode. We end up seeing Michonne going around cutting and slicing all the throats of the CRM soldiers, until she finally ends up seeing Rick, and it was a really cool emotional scene. They end up kissing, and I think that both of them, they end up meeting sort of at a really interesting time, because they have pretty well both moved on. In episode 1, Rick told Okafor that he now officially gets it, and that he's all in. So he had officially moved on from Michonne. He had burned all the notes and burned all the pictures that he had, on the cell phones and all that stuff. And then in this episode, Michonne moved forward in that scene that we had during the night, because remember, the one reason why they attacked this helicopter is because she was on her way back to Alexandria. So both of them have come to the conclusion that they weren't going to see each other again, and then lo and behold, there they are, and then they do officially meet once again. But then we get a scene which I was a little bit upset over, in the sense that I really wish that they didn't have to kill off Nat, but this is where Nat dies, and so it was really cool to see the frustration on Michonne, but also the panic on Rick, because he knows that the CRM are going to come. He knows that this military is not going to stop, so he tells Michonne everything that she needs to do. She can't say that her name is Michonne. She can't say anything about Alexandria. She can't even act as a leader. She needs to act weak and not as somebody who could be a threat. And he basically tells her that he needs to pull his gun on her. If not, then they may actually end up killing her. But it was just really sad to see Nat die. I wish that Nat didn't die, honestly. I really loved him. I would have loved to see his interaction with Rick. I think he could have been a great asset, especially with helping them escape. And I think it would have been also a great way to keep that connection to the other community that had helped Michonne ever since the original series, because it seems like she probably hung it with them for a little while and whatnot. So Either way, it was really sad. It was also really cool to see them meeting as well, because you have Michonne now, who has this really sour taste in her mouth from the CRM. They killed all of her friends and all these people, and then she runs into Rick, who's actually working with the CRM. So, she's probably very confused and whatnot, and she really doesn't know just how far Rick may or may not be gone. We don't really know yet, really, because we've seen Rick sort of break down and give in to the CRM in the first episode, but that was before Michonne came into the picture. Now Michonne is in the picture, so now we have to see, who is going, where does his loyalty really lie? Would he be willing to go against that kind of power for Michonne? Which I think that he would ultimately. This whole series has been marketed as supposedly being a love story between Rick and Michonne, so I have no doubts in my mind that he'll always choose Michonne. But I am very curious to see, now that she, in this episode, is introduced to the CRM. I'm really curious to see, how do you get away from that? You know what I mean? Because nobody ever really gets away from the CRM, so I don't really see any way out, no matter what happens, other than a full-blown war, which was sort of what I was talking about at the end of the last episode, which we'll get into again later on. But anyways, Rick ends up pulling his gun on Michonne, and the helicopter comes and takes them both in, and then we get to the interview scene again now, which parallels how the episode opened. Remember, at the beginning, she was interviewed by Aiden. Now she's being interviewed by the CRM and these higher ups, and I would be curious to know if the leader from World Beyond was a part of this committee, because we don't really know, or I don't think they ever actually truly showed their face. Maybe they did, but I don't think we recognize any of the people that were a part of this committee. But I would be curious to know if any of the characters from World Beyond would end up being here. Especially for Elizabeth Kublik, I believe her name was, from World Beyond. So I would be curious to know if Elizabeth would be there, and if Julia Ormond would end up reprising that role. I never actually looked through the ones who lives. I never looked through her credits, so I don't know if she's actually in any of the episodes. So maybe she is, maybe she's not. But it would be interesting to see if she was somehow connected to this committee, or at the very least connected to General Beale. I'd be very surprised if Beale doesn't know her. I mean, he seems to be the head honcho here, and even Jadis, for that matter. I think Jadis could be pretty high up there as well. But I do feel like General Beale is higher than Jadis, so we'll have to wait and see. But either way, this scene parallels the opening where Michonne was being interviewed by Aiden. Now she's being interviewed by the CRM. So they end up putting her into the same training that Rick and Thorne ends up going through. As you can see, Michonne is a lot more, she's a little more observant and a little more, watching her back, so to speak. She's a little more hostile than Rick is. She's not coming in here with open arms. She's really trying hard to, hide her strength and whatnot, because Rick told her to, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a really cool scene watching Michonne go through all these different factions and all these different areas of the CRM. You can see how she's sizing everything up. She's eyeballing everything. She's very observant, trying to see, the strengths and the weaknesses of the CRM, just to see how far they can really go, or how far, how tough it would be to really escape, given the fact that Rick, has been sort of stuck here for such a long time. And so then we get this really cool scene then with Rick and Michonne finally actually talking. And one thing that I did notice about this scene was that, and I could be completely wrong, but I do think that here Michonne was about to tell Rick about RJ, because he asks how is Judith doing, and she says that Judith is good and all this stuff, and then it's almost like she was about to say she has, and then stopped. And I have a feeling she was going to say she has a brother, because when she stopped, Rick actually pushes her on it, and he's like, well, what were you going to say? Tell me a little bit more. And she's like, not right now, not until we escape, because I do think that she's probably struggling to trust him a little tiny bit. Remember, one of the very last things Nat said to him, or said to her before he died, was, be careful. Do you really trust him? Is he still the same man that he used to be? So I think that this put a lot of doubt in Michonne's mind, and not so much in her heart. I do think that she trusts Rick, and that she knows that he still loves her. But I do think that it might have put a little bit of doubt in her mind, given the fact that he was away for such a long time. And so I really love that back and forth, and that scene and that conversation between them. So then we come to a scene here where we see somebody looking at the interview and watching the interview of Michonne. And this is actually someone who knows Michonne, which at the time, at watching this, I never even thought about the fact that Jadis was here. I kind of forgot about Jadis being here in the background and whatnot, and her being a part of the the CRM. She played a big role in the CRM in World Beyond, and now she's playing a big role with the CRM here and the Ones Who Live. So I actually forgot about Jadis, but it was really cool. Once it is revealed that it was Jadis, it's cool to see that she sees Michonne, and this obviously causes a little bit of panic for her because when it was only Rick, it wasn't so bad, but now that Rick has something to fight for and has something to protect, Rick could definitely become much more of a problem than if he was just there on his own. And then we get this really cool sort of panned out shot where we see Michonne overlooking the CRM. She sees how powerful the CRM really is now, overlooking at all the helicopters, all the military, and all the resources that they have. So I think this sort of makes her open her eyes and realize, just how powerful the CRM is. This is also why I think I believe this is how, Daryl Dixon and his show will tie in later on, as well as Dead City. I think that all these major communities eventually, I do think that there will be sort of like a world war. I don't know if it will be everyone against the CRM or if it will be like a few different communities that are big. We also have the Commonwealth and whatnot, which still exists. So we don't really know, how all that stuff's going to play out eventually. But I do think that eventually there will be a huge war against the CRM. I'm not 100% sure who will be involved, but it's also possible that where Daryl is over in France, and this sort of occupation that he's dealing with over there, maybe they are sort of a branch off of the CRM. We do know that there were some connections, I believe, in World Beyond, where the French was doing experiments that had something to do with the CRM. I believe it was because the CRM was doing experiments as well in the World Beyond. So I do think that there is probably some form of connection between the occupation, which is over in France, that Daryl is dealing with, and now here we have the CRM that Rick and Michonne are dealing with. So I do think that there's probably some form of connection, whether or not they're actually the CRM or just another government that works with the CRM. I'm not 100% sure, but either way, I do think that will be the point of Daryl's show. I do think that he will learn a little bit either about them, or he'll have to use that army against the CRM or something. I do think it'll all tie in together eventually, but probably not until later seasons 1, 2, or 3. I'm not 100% sure that there will be a season 2 for the Ones Who Live, but I would be pretty surprised if there wasn't. And then we get to the very final scene of episode 2, which was, of course, Jadis. Jadis finally actually confronts Rick and basically threatens him, and she's like, hey, what is she doing here, and she basically tells Rick how, she's, it never ceases to amaze her how even here in this type of world, in this post-apocalyptic world, where there's zombies and all this stuff, how two people were able to find each other. And I personally, I think Jadis is actually worried here. I do think that she is a little bit paranoid at the fact that Michonne was able to find Rick, and so I'm very curious to see in the next episode, episode 3, how this conversation will go, how will it end, and also what will this mean for Michonne. Will Jadis reveal herself to Michonne, or will she not? How will all of this tie in, in episode 3? We might not see it at all in episode 3, but I do suspect that most of episode 3 will be now in the present day. I don't think there should be any flashbacks, at least not any major ones, now that Rick and Michonne are actually united. I feel like the rest of the series now will be them trying to escape or come up with a plan on how to escape the CRM without causing them, without causing too much chaos. Because remember, Jadis does know about Alexandria. She does know about the other communities, Hilltop Kingdom, and all these different places, and Oceanside, or Ocean View, or no, Oceanside, I believe it was. So it'd be very curious to see, how this could play into it, because Jadis really holds all the cards here, because she's on the side of the CRM. She actually believes in the CRM as well, which we learn in the World Beyond. We also know she has a very high authoritarian rank, so it's going to be very interesting to see how they're going to have to deal with Jadis. It's possible that Jadis might even be the reason why they escape. Maybe they can work something out, and maybe she can help them escape somehow with her power. She was willing to save Rick's life, so it'd be very curious to see where it goes from there and whatnot, and all that good stuff. So that was basically the scene by scene of episode 2. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I loved seeing Michonne Michonne's perspective. I love seeing all the friends that Michonne have met. Nat was a really cool character. I kind of wish he had stuck around. I don't agree with them actually killing him off, but I was a big fan of Nat, and I would have loved to see him again. I do think that mobile community will end up popping up again at some point. Aiden, I think that Aiden will end up playing a big role eventually. Maybe I could be completely wrong, but I do feel like if Rick and Michonne do eventually escape, I feel like Aiden might be able to help them temporarily, or conceal them somehow, or maybe help them even just simply with resources or whatnot. But I don't think that's the last that we've seen of that community, or at least I hope not, and whatnot. And I'm very curious to see how. I'm curious to see how season 1, if there is only one season, I don't know that necessarily Rick and Michonne will survive. In real life, Michonne, the actor who plays Michonne, Danai Gurira, I believe is how you pronounce her name. I believe she just signed on with Marvel, so she's got a lot of big jobs and whatnot. Just being in Marvel alone, it takes a toll on actors. She's going to be a part of a lot of projects, probably even a part of some Avengers movies in the future and whatnot. So I'm not, like I said, it's really going to depend on whether or not they do a season 2 of The Ones Who Live. If they do a season 2, then Rick and Michonne will definitely both live. I think I think they'll both be willing to come back, and I could see season 1 focusing on Jadis. Maybe Jadis would be like the big bad in season 1, and then General Beale could be the big bad in season 2, and then you could even bring back Julia Ormond, who could portray Elizabeth Kubelik, who would be maybe on par or maybe even a little bit of a higher rank than General Beale. So it'd be really interesting to see where that comes, and it would be interesting to see the tie-ins to The World Beyond. I would love to see Silas. We know Silas is a part of the CRM. He actually joined the military, so it'd be cool to see that, and I hope we do by the end of this season get some connections to maybe Daryl Dixon or even Dead City somehow. I would also be very interested to see if Morgan will return. They have teased Morgan quite a bit, so it'd be interesting to see if he returns as well, and all that good stuff. But I do think that Jadis will eventually end up, or at least potentially end up, going to war, either with Alexandria or with Hilltop or with both, just given the fact that when we watch Dead City appears to be in the future a little bit further, and we know that Maggie is no longer at Hilltop. She's at a place known as the Bricks, so maybe the CRM did attack Alexandria and did attack Hilltop, and that's what forced Maggie to escape and whatnot. So it'd be very interesting to see that. It would be really cool to see Negan be the one who has to come back and save Rick and all that good stuff. But either way, absolutely love this episode. Can't wait to see episode 3. Got a lot of theories right now. I still can't really see the straight line direction, sort of, or the straight path that this series is going to take. But I do think that some of our theories will be correct. I do think that there will be tie-ins. I do think Jadis will have a big role into she'll either attack Hilltop and Alexandria, or she'll help Rick and Michonne escape. Maybe they can blackmail her somehow. I'm not really 100% sure how it's going to go, but I do think she'll play a big role in one or the other. She's either going to attack, or she's going to help them escape. And then if there's a season 2, I suspect that General Beale will be the main antagonist for that season. So with that being said, folks, that's my review of episode 2 of The Ones Who Live. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, and if you like this video, click the subscribe button, and until the next one, take care.